Did Santa bring you coal this Christmas? Well, let's see if Papa Jeff can rectify that with some holly jolly balance updates that we should expect around the corner. Should be a new patch coming in January. So here's kind of a wish list from the community of the top heroes that are sticking out. I want to point out, though, I think the balance state is basically the best it's been in 1 or 2 years. Skill shots, cover, and pathing are all important. Again, this is definitely the best balance we've had for 222 roll lock, but I think we all know it could get a bit better. Starting it off with the first culprit is Reaper. Now, the high-level community, who is often the most vocal with the balance complaints, is probably going to go silent on Reaper for a while because he doesn't fit into what is the top meta playstyle right now, which is ranged poke and cover usage. You can consider Reaper a brawler or a flanker, and at the highest levels anyway, that just sort of gets shot in the head by Hanzo or Baptiste from range now, but it's still incredible at most levels of play, where the ranged DPS don't just one dink a Reaper from across the map. Now, Reaper, like all the heroes on this list actually, are beneficiaries of the GOATS era power creep of the game. And the big benefit to that actually was they made Reaper fast, fluid, and fun to play. His cooldowns are impactful, but they also made him far too forgiving. The old Reaper back in the day was quite clunky, and I actually thought it was still pretty fair because he still could hide around a corner, jump out, and get a free kill on you without much skill required. That seemed pretty fair to me at the time for how much work you could do just being a crafty player. But now you don't need many shenanigans because your cooldowns do the work for you. But on top of that, he also is able to lifesteal through a lot of damage sources in the game. The lower damage tanks and supports especially struggle to help their teammate who's getting farmed by Reaper, who either just kills them instantly or out heals that damage. And that makes for a really lame brawly playstyle that I think a lot of players don't like. If Reaper's fast and fluid and sort of a slower version of Tracer, jumps in on your team and gets a kill, I think people expect, okay, that's how Reaper works. But being able to just win through math and having so much mass self-heal that certain characters just flat out can't fight him doesn't feel good. Makes the game feel a bit too rock, paper, scissors-y. And what most players either want to see Blizzard do is reduce the amount of self-heal. Keep in mind it's at 40% still. He'd still feel pretty oppressive at 30 or even 20%. Even if he had 0, he'd still be able to jump into your backline and just kill something instantly for free without needing much aim. But if you'll allow me to come out with a only 90s kids remember take, I kind of miss the old souls that he used to be able to collect to gain life. If you're a newer player, you might not even know this used to be a thing, but before Reaper had lifesteal, he used to be able to harvest the souls of fallen enemies to gain life. And the benefit of this is that it incentivized movement. So for example, rather than death blossoming in, life stealing on everything around you, you would have to kill a target and move towards that globe in order to gain the life from killing it, incentivizing movement. And I would like to see that come back to the character rather than just winning through math. There's probably no way that they can balance it for current era Overwatch though, because the problem with the mechanic was that if you had a kill, you were already pretty likely to win the fight anyway, and if you couldn't get a kill, well, it didn't find an opening, whereas the new and improved Reaper with lifesteal allows him to be more brawly. The lifesteal nerf seems like a no-brainer, but the other route that they could go is just ever so slightly reducing the ranged fall off, because the shotguns are pretty effective at like 10 meters out, where they're really easy to hit, and since they buffed his distance closer and everything else about him, if he's going to be that insane at super close range, maybe he doesn't need to kill things for free outside of extreme close range. Keep in mind, if you're having trouble with Reaper, you really need a Sigma on your team. His full kit has the capability of countering a Reaper if you hit your shots, or a high charge Zarya can contest him as well, but basically every other tank at best can run away from him, which is just not really a fun interaction for anybody. Speaking of not fun for everybody, moving on to Mei, who may perhaps have the most power creep of any character on this list, which I know is a dirty word that the developers would like us not to say, but let's think back, okay? If the current day Mei had a fight with launch day Mei, who do you think would win? Just about every aspect of modern Mei has been buffed, removing the ranged fall off on her icicle, so it does full damage across all distances, pretty much making her a mini Hanzo. The ultimate radius kept getting bigger and bigger. The wall cooldown kept dropping. Mei just got buffed and buffed and buffed to be the ice queen we know today. Even when she was weak, she was very obnoxious for the average low ranked player, because if she just rolled up on you and froze you died without having much of a response. But that was sort of a one-off gimmicky kill that she used to be able to get once in a while, and everything else she did was hard to do, actually. But now it's the other way around, where everything she does is really strong, and she also can freeze you, not only just you, but multiple targets at the same time, which is particularly bad due to how effective the rest of the damage in the game is, and how crazy tanks are at dealing damage. Yeah, this is something nobody really talks about, but Orisa and Sigma are such crazy damage dealers that Mei being weaker, quote unquote, in the damage category doesn't really matter, because Orisa can lay into a frozen target and be the damage follow-up to Mei's disable just on her own, and Sigma's insane by himself. Okay, so we laid out everything that's really strong about Mei, but what can the devs even do about her? The easiest area to look to is the corniest aspect of her kit, which is her primary fire, being able to freeze enemies, and in fact, multiple of them. A while back, they buffed the DPS of her primary fire, and also I'm pretty sure at some point changed the way targets got frozen to make it affect them more quickly. I can't remember. There's been so many buffs to Mei, it's hard to keep track, but I think that's the first area you'd want to look at because it's the most obnoxious to play against. Because both Mei Wall and Icicle require skillful usage, they're not as obnoxious and you don't feel like you can't outplay them, but because she also has the ability to go into cryo freeze and bail herself out of a sticky situation, it makes it easier for her to roll up on somebody and just get free kills with the endothermic blaster freeze ray. So because of that, I think definitely the multi-freeze should go, perhaps even the damage per second on it. I mean, why should it be good at doing damage when it sets up for free kills too? It doesn't make much sense. My only concern is that if they do go down this route to nerf Mei, I think they should also at the same time nerf Wrecking Ball. That's really important. If they don't, Wrecking Ball looks really nutty with the power creep buffs he's also received, because she's the only thing that's stopping him from being probably the best tank in the game, in my opinion. You think Orisa halts are strong, Wrecking Ball would be the destroyer of worlds if Mei wasn't hardcore keeping him in check right now. We can walk and chew bubblegum, can't we, Blizzard? Continuing our route picking on DPS heroes, Hanzo is an interesting character because he becomes problematic at two different tiers. If you think of Overwatch as a spectrum of skills from lower, middle, upper, and pro, Hanzo's most obnoxious at either the lower tiers or the pro tiers. Reason being, when he's maximized, he just sort of does everything, and at much lower tiers, the movement and pathing and situational awareness against all projectiles really, but up against Hanzo, because he can one-shot kill, he sort of can just fire down lanes and will eventually kill something. That partially is due to the over-reliance that players have on balling up together constantly at lower ranks. We've discussed that in the past few videos, but interestingly enough, I would say at the sort of middle tier, and even in the higher tier ranked context, Hanzo doesn't feel absolutely required, because if you hit shots or get kills on anything, it can replicate what Hanzo does. It's just that he's the most stable, do everything damage dealer right now. How does that become the case? Because if you're somebody who played Overwatch at launch and hasn't come back till now, you might be shocked to find out that that's how Hanzo is, but they made everything about him more reliable and gave him one of the best escapes in the game. So much like Mei, he just does too many things. Recon Arrow got buff after buff, being able to see your enemy through walls, an ability when Widowmaker uses it as an ultimate, pro teams just wait it out entirely, don't even try to play into it. Hanzo has a mini version of that on cooldown, which in my opinion anyway, the design of the hero made sense with Recon Arrow being so strong because his damage was so hard to hit that you needed to set up the engagement with situational awareness to find those picks more reliably. But they buffed his arrow speed, making it nearly a hit scan, which fine, that made it more accessible to all players, and all damage dealers are kind of nutty across the board now, so I don't see that going away. Otherwise, you'd have to nerf half the heroes in the game at this point. And Storm Arrow is a really reliable ability that honestly isn't even that much better than his main arrow, because his main arrow one-shot kills things. Sometimes using Storm Arrow is worse than just using your main arrow. It does, of course, slam damage into things and makes him way better against dive, but it is a skill shot that you have to hit, so it's hard to justify robbing that of the character when that's something we want to see. The area that I think is way too good about Hanzo is Lunge being on a 5-second cooldown. Lunge is freaking incredible because you have it up so often. Hanzo can outplay just about every movement cooldown in the game. It used to be the case where Winston with a 6-second leap feasted on Hanzo before he had Lunge, but now with a 5-second cooldown, Winston almost never can catch you out, and at the higher levels of play, it's considered that Hanzo just counters Winston, which doesn't make sense considering he's a sniper. Genji fares slightly better, but due to having Storm Arrow and a one-shot, a lot of diving characters struggle against Hanzo as well. And for context, we'll look to another hero that is similar to Hanzo, but is kind of power crept by him, Ashe. Ashe's Coach Gun is on a 10-second cooldown and deals damage while also applying knockback. Now, you might say, well, it does more things, so it deserves to be on a longer cooldown, right? The only problem is, as far as burst damage is concerned, there is absolutely no difference between Hanzo, who doesn't have to reload, lunging away and using an arrow of any kind, and Ashe using Coach Gun to displace herself. Coach Gun is easier to hit because it is kind of a shotgun blast, but that's about it. And the cooldown is so long that tons of mobility characters can exploit Ashe. Because if you think about it, Hanzo can do the same exact thing as Coach Gun other than the knockback, but just more damage. Lunging away with 2 storm arrows or a primary fire arrow that can one-shot kill is just better than Coach Gun. As far as an offensive tool is concerned, and it's a better defensive tool because you have it up so often and it potentially can get you much farther horizontally away from the enemy, which makes him even safer than Ashe up against dive heroes. Ashe's Coach Gun is better at launching Ashe into the air, but horizontal distance control from your enemy is much more valued in Overwatch because if a character has mobility, they typically also have the ability to jump up onto high ground anyway. It's only really Tracer that doesn't, but there's ways she can get around that. But Genji, Doomfist, Winston, Wrecking Ball, all of these things can go up top to contest Ashe, which is ground Hanzo can get anyway, just with his passive ability to wall climb, and is more effective at getting away with lunge more frequently. So I think nerfing that cooldown is the key to finally make Hanzo feel like he can be exploited. I will note that he is a large beneficiary to the state of the meta as it is now. I sort of said earlier, but because the meta is more about fast peaks using cover, Hanzo just fits into that entirely. So it is a meta state issue as well, but I think it is important that the devs nerf the problems that cause that to be too strong rather than buffing the answers, because we all know the magical word that has crept up on us when that's happened for long enough. We're done picking out damage heroes now. Let's move on to the Terminator. Orisa. And I feel for the devs on this one because it seems like they can't find a place to put her into an acceptable category in the community's eyes. The recent rework to her kit made her the most fun she's ever been, but she's still less fun than the other tanks. I do like the direction they went. Having barriers be breakable just feels like a good thing for the game all around. And because of that, you kind of need Fortify to be outrageous in order for her to not just die instantly. I kind of don't mind that. What I think most players do mind is that Fortify feels required up against the likes of Mei, Reaper, and all the strong ultimates it counters as well. The cooldown exchanges are now so important to the game of Overwatch, where the thing that made Fortify bad back in the day was mobility was strong enough where you could just bypass or go kill something and it didn't accomplish anything. Whereas now, team comps are much more stable due to the powerful cooldowns and escapes things have on their own. So because her team can survive, doesn't need necessarily to be flexible to run back and save them. And the weird thing about Halt is if you looked at Overwatch as a pure MOBA game, it would be considered one of the most important team skill shots in the game. But because we're playing a shooter, most players seem to be disgusted by it and how effective it is at setting up for combos. Halt is so good that at the highest levels, even when teams are running divey style comps, they still use Orisa just because of the opportunities that it provides. And to some degree, I feel the devs have designed themselves into a corner with Orisa, where kind of similar to how D.Va back in the day was a defense matrix bot, well, Orisa is kind of a Halt bot, where her potential is so high that you kind of have to pick her if you want to be able to kill anything, but her gameplay consists of surviving until her next halt so that your teammates can go out and get kills. Halt might be the #1 cooldown in the entire game. And one of the major reasons for that is how weak D.Va is, which, yeah, they could buff D.Va again, but then we would be in an entirely different meta state. If D.Va got strong again, the whole game would be different. That's a whole nother kettle of fish that I have no idea what Blizzard can do, because right now you have an issue where Sigma's overall output, when maximized, is definitely more than D.Va, but he has a ton of skill shots, so it scales up the ranks in sort of a fair way, but with him being strong, he's just going to be a top tier pick. And you almost have like a Mercy versus Ana situation where do you want to make the easier mechanical hero stronger to outweigh those skill shots? Well, then they very quickly become irrelevant at a higher level of play. It sort of feels like we can have one or the other, at least for the top level meta. Either it's the case where tanks that make space dominate the skill shot tanks, where they just take what they want from them, or that's not the case and skill shot tanks have a higher potential peak at the highest levels of play, which I would say is what we have now. What I would like to see is Orisa somehow become as cool as Sigma. But since I don't think that ever can happen without just a complete redesign, it probably is best to make Orisa a defense-only tank, where she's very situational, which goes against the new balance philosophy that the dev team have had for sort of the middle era of Overwatch's life, but also I think the wrong one, where they try to make every hero good at everything all the time, and it's just a huge mistake and makes for more problems than it solves. So other things you could look to do with halt, you could nerf its cooldown, but cooldown nerfs are largely boring, don't really solve the other problems with the fun factor of it all. And even with that, if you considered a free kill on cooldown, it might not even be enough. What I've seen Samito suggest is reducing the pull radius, because it actually pulls you in farther than Graviton Surge does. The only problem I have with that idea is that I think doing that would make it easier to pinpoint an Orisa halt to section off a squishy away from its tanks. So what I mean is, with the radius being as large as it is, you often pull more than you mean to. And I'm not so sure if that nerfs the character or just buffs like a skillful variant of it. Because sure, if you pull the whole team together, that can combo with all sorts of things. Big AoE damage becomes better with the current version of halt. But I think if it had a reduced pull radius, then individual pickoffs would be way easier to get because you can kind of thread the needle of where you place it. Maybe that is a better playstyle, and that's the ticket to make Orisa cool and have halt be a skillful ability people respect. But I don't know if that is even possible because we are playing a shooter first game, not a MOBA game. And it essentially is just a MOBA ability. And without any real solutions to this issue, I'm just going to move on and hope that someone else solves it for me. The last character on the list is Baptiste, who right before the barrier nerfs went live, got a rate of fire buff that most of us have been scratching our heads about ever since. Perhaps if the devs assumed that Dive would come back, Baptiste would feel like an exploitable character and wanted to improve his ability to defend himself, but that really hasn't happened. The weird thing with Baptiste, a ton of players really want to see Baptiste get nerfed, but I don't actually think he's the problem. I think he's a beneficiary of the current playstyle that we have. I mean, they can revert the fire rate change, whatever, I'm happy with that. But as far as Lamp goes, the immortality field that is getting the ire of many high-level players right now, I think that looks way better because Dive is so weak. If, for example, Mei got nerfed, then Wrecking Ball would be a bit stronger, and if you combine comps that dive with Lucio, or send Doomfist in, or far over the top, the displacement and crowd control, or more specifically, the knockback buffs that came through when Baptiste got added to the game are so strong that this idea of playing around a Baptiste Lamp just kind of goes away entirely, in my opinion. And then he just looks like an exploitable character. As soon as Dive starts to look a bit better, I think Baptiste immediately looks a lot worse. But it's the combination of a character like Hanzo, who's undiveable and has incredible damage at all ranges. Mei can't be dove and just counters it hardcore by herself. It's these other elements that make Baptiste's weaknesses not show up at all, and you can't really exploit him because he's got all these other powerful characters around him. And don't get me wrong, it is incredibly annoying to play against, but it's more annoying because of the state of the meta we have, where it's about using cover, ranged peek. With that being the case, Baptiste just fits perfectly into it. But in my opinion, he's the flimsiest of all these top meta picks, the most exploitable, and he sort of uses how crazy powerful the rest of them are to hide behind them and be safe. And I think as soon as you start to knock down a few of these other components, he's not as good. But I had to put him on the list for today because he's a character that a lot of high-level players find annoying and obnoxious, but I don't think he causes problems at most levels of play, actually. And as soon as the tides start to turn, he won't be the king of the meta at the pro level either if the dev team address some of these other problems that we have pointed out. So that's going to be everything for today's video. I hope you guys did enjoy it. It's always fun to discuss balance with you guys. And if you did like the video, be sure to hit like on the video. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so that you actually get notified when our videos go live. Link to the description is our Twitter, where we tweet out news, updates, and dank memes. I've been Frito for You Overwatch. We'll see you guys next time.